Welcome back, Focus Learners. We're diving right into a seriously gripping explainer today. We're breaking down the Shadow-Crypt, architecture of the refused self. This is a story of psychological horror that literally redefines the whole concept of a haunted house. It all goes down at this very ordinary apartment building on Caldwell Street. So let's just get right into it. Think about your standard ghost story, right? Usually it's some outside entity, a foreign spirit trying to break in. But what if the monster hiding in the dark was actually your own repressed mind? Seriously, imagine if the horrifying presence taking over your living room was made entirely out of the parts of yourself that you've just pushed away. That's the exact terrifying reality the residents on Caldwell Street are waking up to. Our way into all this weirdness is through a guy named Martin Voss. He's a 41-year-old archivist, recently divorced, and honestly totally emotionally detached. Then, on just a random Tuesday morning, he notices something. It's the super distinct smell of burnt almonds right in his kitchen. No source at all, nothing's burning. Then, a few days later, a shadow in the corner of his living room, well, it seems to look back at him. And no, it's not a trick of the light. We're talking about a shadow with an intentional, directed awareness. Which brings us to Section 1, Archival Anomalies Unearthing the Physical Source. Since Martin is literally an archivist, his first instinct isn't to run away screaming, it's to research. He needs to find out what exactly is sitting beneath his building. And what he finds is kind of mind-blowing. Before his apartment building was ever built, that exact area was a settlement called the Midden, which basically got wiped off the map sometime before the 1880s. But then, in September 1887, a surveyor named J.M. Aldrich logs a massive geological anomaly right under the future site of Martin's building. He dubbed it the Crypt of Keeping. Martin eventually tracks down these super obscure letters from 1888 between Aldrich and a former Midden resident named Francis Vane, sent just before the modern building was finished up. Here's the absolute kicker. This haunting isn't just in their heads, it has literal, physical roots. Aldrich writes this totally panicked letter, noting that the city was pouring 12 feet of fresh concrete foundation straight over this ancient underground anomaly. They completely ignored his warnings that simply being near this chamber defied, as he put it, the methods available to a practical man. Now, Francis Vane writes back to Aldrich, sharing an explanation that had been passed down through generations of Midden residents. And this right here is where our explainer shifts from a spooky ghost story into a massive psychological thriller. Vane points out that the crypt isn't a graveyard or some portal to hell. It's actually a place where a person's inside becomes visible, where the stuff you carry within you is drawn out into physical space. Another local, Esther Vane, hit the nail on the head with this one. She basically said, look, humans can try to build over the truth. You can bury it under 12 feet of concrete and a mountain of legal paperwork, but they're still going to feel it. Because ancient psychological and geological forces, they do not care about zoning laws. As she so perfectly put it, the earth doesn't sign documents. Okay, moving to Section 2, the threat is inside, the psychological source. Because here's the wild part. The physical crypt under the building, it's not actually generating the monsters. It's just an amplifier. The real threat is entirely human. To really get this, we have to talk about the Jungian shadow. The famous psychologist Carl Jung talked about the shadow not just as a neat metaphor, but as a real cumulative thing. It's the totality of everything you refuse to be. Every single emotion you decided was unacceptable, every need you swallowed down, every bit of anger you suppressed, it all gets shomed into this underground room of the self. And you know what? Those refused fragments don't just vanish. They pile up. They can even be passed down through generations. This shadow just sits there in the dark, waiting with absolute patience. It possesses literal ontological weight, meaning it takes up real space and presses against reality. And the source text is very clear on this. It does not negotiate. Keep ignoring it, and it will eventually find its own way out. Let's jump into Section 3, the architecture of refusal, the neighbor's burdens. Because it turns out, Martin is definitely not the only one dealing with this. The whole building is forcing its residents to face their own internal cages. The crypt is basically customizing the horror for everyone by amplifying their specific refused trauma. Martin's dealing with his refused need to rely on anyone. Temmie, the artist in 4A, is literally seeing manifestations of her refused grief over losing her mom. Down in 2A, Alina is facing decades of pushing away her own intuition and self-trust. Pete, the building super, had to face his own deeply repressed fear. And Sarah in 3B, She was so completely terrified of her refused love that she just packed up and fled the building entirely. When you compare how they act on the surface to what's happening underneath, wow, the contrast is stark. Up top, these folks have built really effective cages. They survive by organizing their grief, managing their pain, and projecting this outward competence. But down below, the crypt is the ultimate disruptor. It amplifies that refused, hidden self until it literally breaks down that carefully constructed surface and forces it to materialize right in the room with them. 8 to 10 meters. That's how deep the Crypt of Keeping is buried. I want to point this out because it's a stark reminder that this isn't just a thought experiment. This intense psychological reckoning is fueled by a very real, ancient chamber humming away just about 30 feet beneath the floorboards. And that takes us to the breaking point. In Section 4, the shadow becomes solid, where the haunting escalates. Because that psychological shadow, it can't stay an abstract idea forever. It demands to be seen. Martin's experience ramps up insanely fast. We go from the phantom smell of deep earth and burnt almonds to the surface of his locked bedroom door, visually turning into this infinite, dark depth. Then, a chair physically drags itself across the living room to face the front door, just waiting. And the climax? His repressed self manifests as a solid, human-shaped silhouette standing right there in his apartment, hitting him with this overwhelming tsunami of pure rage and grief that he's been dodging for 41 years. So, what do you do? How do you survive a haunting when the ghost is literally you? We're at Section 5, the path to integration, eating yourself whole. This is the agonizing but totally necessary process of turning that shadow from your worst enemy into an ally. Pete, the superintendent, actually survived his own haunting years ago, and he lays out the exact mechanics for getting through this. Step 1, let it become solid. Don't try to rationalize it away. Step 2, when the building shows you the truth of who you are, do not look away. And Step 3, acknowledge it as yours. You have to look straight at all that rage, that grief, that need, and basically say, I see you, and you are mine. Doing this requires a massive shift in how we think. We're basically programmed to view our inner darkness as the enemy, right? Like it's an invasion we need to manage, medicate, or just destroy. But the crypt flips that completely. It reveals that the shadow is actually your stronghold. It's the keep. It's where your mind has been protecting your absolute most valuable treasures, your deepest loves, your rawest power, your truest art, just keeping them safe until you're finally strong enough to carry them yourself. Now, what happens after you integrate all that? Martin finds out it's not some magical cure-all exit. The morning after his terrifying integration, well, it's just a Tuesday. He still has to go to work. The train is probably still delayed. But it's a Tuesday where he is finally 100% present. That numb, flat feeling in his life is gone, and he's fully occupying the actual size of himself. I absolutely love this quote from Pete because it hits so close to home for all of us, even if we don't live above a supernatural crypt. He says, the building will continue to show you. When it shows you, don't look away. That's the instruction. Life is always going to bring up the stuff we're trying to hide. The instruction is so simple, but so incredibly hard to actually do. Don't look away. Ultimately, this really isn't a story about some evil, malicious spirit. It's about a deeply misunderstood piece of who we are. The shadow doesn't actually want to destroy you. It just wants what it has always wanted. It wants to be seen. It wants to come home. And that brings us to the close of our explainer today, leaving us with a pretty big question to chew on. What have you stored away in the crypt of your own making? What needs, what griefs, what incredibly powerful parts of yourself have you locked in the dark? And when they finally knock on the door, are you brave enough not to look away? Thanks for exploring this one with me, focused learners. Keep diving deep, and I'll see you in the next explainer.